Hey guys, Joe Sidoti here. Thanks for stopping by for another video. This one is all about saturation. What are my go-to favorite saturation plugins? A saturation plugin, what I'm referring to, is not necessarily like a distortion pedal for a guitar amp, but plugins that emulate analog gear and the ability to drive those into distortion and into saturation. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, our interfaces that we typically use, they may have some mic pre's on them, you may have external mic pre's, but let's just say for argument's sake, you're using an interface that has 2 to 4 to 8 mic pre's built in. It hits that mic pre, then it goes to your A to D converter, analog to digital. Now that converter's job is to translate whatever that analog signal is coming in and convert it to digital ones and zeros and print it to a hard drive as a WAV file. So sometimes that might be exactly what you want, just a perfect digital version of whatever was coming in. But what if whatever was coming in didn't have the vibe and the energy that you wanted? Let's say you wish that you had that $2,000 tube mic pre or that tape machine that you're then dumping into Pro Tools or Logic. Well, with these saturation plugins that I'm going to show you, you can emulate that sound and you can bring that energy and that angst to your mixes. So without further ado, let's jump into Pro Tools and I'm going to show you my favorite go-to saturation plugins. Okay, now again, no special order here. I just put some of them up here. The first one is going to be the Schoeps Omni channel by Waves. I like this plugin to add distortion. Sometimes I will use it just for the saturation here. I'll crank it up and I'll get it to where I kind of like it. I'll listen to odd or even or heavy, whatever does the trick for what I feel is lacking. A lot of times this is gonna be a vocal or a snare drum or a bass guitar. I just wanna add some saturation, which helps act as almost like a compressor because it's chopping off those peaks and it's saturating that just like it used to do through either a tube or a solid state piece of gear or a tape machine. And that's one of my favorites here. Sometimes I will use the EQ or the compressor, but for the most part, I actually just use this plugin. It's kind of a waste for the saturation. So that is my first favorite saturation plugin, the Schoeps Omni channel by Waves. Next is the Slate Virtual Mix Rack. Now there is a long list of components you can drop in to this mix rack, but I'm going to show you kind of the 4 go-to ones that I use all the time. First is the virtual channel. This is emulating the input channel, the line input of an analog console. And in this case, you've got 2 different flavors of SSL. You've got, I believe this is an API, the USA. You've got British in for Neve. You've got a Trident console and then the RC tube. I'm not sure which console this is. I like to use the Neve input settings and then jump over here for a second to the virtual mix bus. So this is now emulating the 2 bus of a console, and I'll switch that to an SSL. Here's why. I really like the sound of a Neve mic pre going through a Neve console and then that stuff mixed on an SSL console. So this is what that kind of gives me. So a lot of times when I have individual channels, I'll put it on the Neve, and then when I have a mix bus, I'll put that plugin on and I'll put it in the 4K mode. Now, the next thing in this VMR, you're looking at this distressor, the FG Stress, which is an Empirical Labs distressor. Right off the bat, it's just a compressor, it's not a saturator. But if you look at these settings right here, distortion 2 and distortion 3, these are going to give you 2 different flavors of saturation. And when you can get this thing into at least the 1% of the total harmonic distortion, when this little light flickers on, you're starting to add some real grit. And so based off of how much input signal you're given, what the ratio is, you can drive this thing into distortion, and it really is pleasing. And again, I like this on snare drum, vocals, bass guitar, keyboards. Maybe you've got like a synth and it's kind of got too much dynamics. Well, sometimes just adding a little bit of this distortion from the distressor, it really helps tame that and kind of keep it where you want it. And then last in the VMR, there's a whole series of these tube emulations. There's a London, there's a Hollywood. What is the other one? It's a New York, London, Hollywood. I kind of like the London one for general sense. You really have to just drop in the New York and the Hollywood and see what you like. But this is real simple. You just turn up some saturation. I tend to keep it in console mode rather than preamp mode. It's a little bit more tame. Be careful of this high pass filter. It's actually a high pass filter. It will cut off the bottom end in your signal. So I just leave that wide open, and I kind of get this set. And that's just another really good way of adding some of that analog grit to a signal that was otherwise pristinely captured. All right, next is the Slate. Again, sorry, I'm a big fan. Not sponsored at all by Slate. I just want to show you this tape machine. I have tried every tape machine plugin that is out there, and this one just happens to be my favorite. There are some other good ones out there, so I'm not saying this is the only one. This is just my favorite. And here's why I like it. Because you've got a 2-inch 16-track option, or you've got a 1/2-inch 2-track option. And believe me when I tell you, these sound completely different. And you can just decide what works best depending on what you need and what you're looking for. I'll tend to use the 1/2-inch mode when it's on a mix bus, and I'll tend to use the 2-inch 16-track mode when it's on an individual track. It just depends. There's no hard set rule for this. You've got two different tape options. You've got 30 IPS or 15 IPS, that's inches per second, for those that aren't aware of what a tape machine does. You can show it here, which is kind of cool, and when you're playing, these reels move. I tend to just leave that hidden. There's all sorts of cool settings that you can get into in here, and you can really just calibrate this like it's a real tape machine. Word to the wise, if you never calibrated a real tape machine, just leave that alone, don't touch it. But it's pretty cool if you know what you're doing. You can kind of get in there and do some stuff that, we used to do with tape machines. We would use a calibration, an MRL tape, and we would put it on, and let's just say the tones on the MRL tape were all set at VU0. Well, if you were to then calibrate your machine so that was at -6, then anytime you were hitting 0 on your tape machine, you were actually hitting +6. So it was a way to recalibrate your machine to make sure that you always had hard, solid tape saturation. You can do stuff like that with this. So like I say, if you're not sure what you're doing, just leave it alone. It sounds great as it is. But nevertheless, there it is, my favorite tape machine plugin. Next is the Console 1. If you guys have seen any of my videos, you know that I'm a fan of the Softube Console 1. Let me just be honest with you. Before I got the Console 1, I used the Waves SSL, bundle, if you will, the console and all that. And it's a great plugin. It really is. This thing is not only, I'd say, just as good, if not better than the Waves. It comes with the Console 1 controller, which for me is a huge deal breaker. I want a knob for every function. And with my Softube Console 1 controller, I've got literally a knob for everything you see here and a button for everything you see here. So I never even really open up this plugin. It's just on every track, and I go through and I turn the knobs with my Console 1, and it's great. But this has an amazing drive characteristic. Now they say when this thing is at 5, it is emulating a true SSL console. And keep in mind, this is licensed and endorsed by Solid State Logic. So this is them saying, yeah, this thing sounds like our console. This particular one is the 4K. They have a 9000 series as well. Really awesome. 9000 series sounds totally different than a 4000 series. So anyways, the drive here is just great. So I just start out at about 5.5. I've just made that my default. But when I want a little extra grit, man, I'll crank that up just a hair. And then you've got a character knob, which basically adds more distortion to the higher frequencies or the lower frequencies. So you can really tone shape with just a couple knobs, which is really awesome. Not to mention the compressor and the EQ and the gate and all of that. But then, just as part of the SSL sound, you can drive the input gain way hot and get it in there. And then if that's too loud, just turn the output down and you are getting some serious analog loveliness. All right, so that's the Console 1 Softube. I love it. I can't speak highly enough of it. And last but not least is the Chris Lord Algae Mixdown. This thing has become one of my favorite plugins. Now, I don't use this on individual tracks, but you can bet your bottom dollar it is on every master fader of every song that I mix. I use this as my mix bus, and that's it. This is what goes on my mix bus. And it's really great because not only does it have, you know, input and output level, so you can kind of do some balancing there if you want. It's got a little bit of a bass shelf EQ. It's got a little bit of a treble, and it's really kind of a low treble. I mean, I'm not sure, but I would be willing to guess it's at like 2, 3, or 4K. It's pretty far down in the high mid, so it really shifts the whole mix one way or the other, but it's subtle and it's slight. And then it's got some compression, which is emulating Chris's red compressor, I believe, the Focusrite. And then here is this drive. So this plugin does actually add saturation. And there's a drive knob on that Focusrite compressor. But here's something that this plugin does that is really phenomenal. Pay attention. When I leave this at default, 0, 0, 0 all the way around, and I'm getting -2 or -3 of gain reduction, this thing is set perfectly. And it adds glue and it adds drive to my mix, and it really makes sure that nothing really goes too far over that. But if you crank up this drive fader, it will just slam it and slam it and slam it, and it doesn't get any quieter and it doesn't get any louder. It is like putting a limiter on your mixer. Now that can be good and that can be bad. The point is though, if you really wanted to drive a mix or any individual track for that matter, you could crank that drive knob and your volume does not increase or decrease. It just really saturates it. And so it's doing like an auto gain compensation, which is really great. So again, I use this on every master bus. I can't speak highly enough of it as well. And it has by far improved the quality of my mixes. Huge side note, you must mix into this. Don't add it after you've got your mix going. Now, if you've just gotten this plugin for the first time and you've already got a mix going that you want to try it on, yeah, then do that. But the best way to use this plugin and any compressor or dynamics control or saturation on your mix bus is to put it on your mix bus, set the nominal settings, and then start bringing up your faders, and don't pay attention to it. Just check it every now and then that you're hitting the levels right. And it will do things to your mix that you don't even realize it's doing, and you're making decisions based off of this glue that's happening at the end, and your mix just sounds better from the get-go, and it helps you achieve a more finalized sound quicker. So that is the list of my go-to saturation plugins. Now, these are the ones I use on a day-to-day basis. There are other distortion plugins that I'll use when I really need something to just straight up distort, rip and roar, but that's more of an artistic decision, and this video is to show you what I use to emulate analog gear. I really want the sound of the analog gear, and I want that subtle harmonic distortion, and I feel that these plugins do a great job of it. So please, guys, like this video if you got anything out of it. Leave a comment, let me know what some of your go-to saturation plugins are. And please, subscribe to the channel. If you're watching this video right now and you're not subscribed, shame on you. No, but please subscribe to the channel. It really helps out. It really helps build the channel up and the algorithm and all of that YouTube whatnot. So I really appreciate your time, guys. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you in the next video.